Minister of Finance and her colleagues to apply pressure to encourage this for First Nations. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Davenport, 30 seconds.
A very brief question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his excellent question. We know that we need to build more housing for Indigenous peoples here in Canada. We need to build more on reserves. We are very committed to doing that. We've committed a significant amount of money, and we will continue to commit a significant amount of money to be building the homes that they need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member will have 4 minutes for questions and comments after question period. Statements by members. Déclaration de député, l'honorable député de Davenport.
Madam Speaker, on April 29, disaster struck the state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. Flash floods and heavy rains 3 times higher than normal led to the worst flooding that residents of the state have seen since 1941. More than 2.3 million people across 471 municipalities have been impacted. 600,000 displaced and over 100 people have died. 500,000 continue to be in shelters and cannot get back to their homes. This is a tragedy of enormous proportions, but the Brazilian community is strong and resilient. Brazilian Canadians quickly came together to assemble 85,000 kilos of goods for those impacted in record time. And in addition, Brazilian leaders hosted a Life for Lives fundraiser to raise funds to support rebuilding efforts for those who have lost their homes. Canada also moved quickly to work with trusted international partners, World Vision and Red Cross, to hand out life-saving kits and to give hundreds of thousands of dollars for immediate emergency aid to those affected by the flooding. I want to thank everyone who stepped up to help. Canada will continue to be there for Brazil as they continue to deal with this difficult crisis. Viva Brazil and Viva Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, it's my favourite time of year. Starting next week, the Caribou will be home to fast-paced, world-class rodeo action. It's the ropes and the reins, the joy and the pain. It's the bulls and the blood, the dust and the mud, the roar of the Sunday crowd, and the Letterbuck Saloon playing country music just a little too loud. Hear, hear. Bucking broncs fun under the hot Quesnel sun, whether it's the Williams Lake Stampede, Billy Barker Days, or the Quesnel Rodeo, you're sure to have some fun. It's boots and chaps, it's cowboy hats, wild horses and the smoke show. It's the broncs in the blood, the steers in the mud. Mr. Speaker, we call it rodeo. It's time to rope that dream, blow off some steam, and head down to the greatest shows on dirt. I hope to see you all at the 96th Annual Williams Lake Stampede and the 57th Annual Quesnel Rodeo. Yee-haw!
The Honourable Member from Richmond Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the life and legacy of a remarkable community leader, Dr. David Chia Ping Tang, who sadly passed away on May 31st because of COVID-19 virus. As the Chief Executive Officer of Tzu Chi Foundation Canada, David dedicated himself to building a better community for everyone. Beyond his professional accomplishment, David was a source of inspiration and wisdom for all who knew him. He immigrated to Canada in 2006 and started volunteering for Tzu Chi, and in 2019 he moved to Vancouver with the hope of building a home for his family and serving the community, where he touched the lives of many with his value, compassion, and service. He lived a life of volunteerism that embodied the Buddhist teaching of compassion, kindness, and genuineness. To the family of David, especially his wife and 2 sons, I would like to extend my heartfelt condolences. Let's work together to preserve and continue his legacy to build a better and more compassionate and inclusive Canada for everyone. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Thérèse.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to a very special person who's actively involved in my riding and throughout Quebec, Louise Bourgeois, president for over 20 years of the Fédération des Mouvements Personnes d'Abord in Quebec, and a member for over 30 years of the Mouvement Personnes d'Abord in Sainte-Thérèse. Ms. Bourgeois is a tireless campaigner for the collective defense of the rights of people living with an intellectual disability. She tirelessly lends her voice to those who, like her, remind us with conviction that everyone has the same rights and that we must do more and do it better. Ms. Bourgeois, Your great expertise, dedication, professionalism, compassion, and tenacity make you an exceptional person who contributes significantly to making our society fairer and more inclusive. Bravo, and thank you for your commitment.
The Honourable Member from Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, my private member's bill C-404 is an act to establish a National Conversion Therapy Awareness Day. This bill would establish a National Day of Awareness for conversion therapy on January 7th of each year, which is the date the law banning this harmful practice came into force in Canada in 2022. Two people inspired the creation of this bill: Ben Rogers, who is from the Kingston area, and Veronica Merrifield from Cape Breton Canso. Ben is the founder of the group CT Survivors Connect, a first-of-its-kind support group for conversion therapy survivors. Survivors come together to support one another and access and share support resources. Thank you, Ben and Veronica, for your work and inspiration. I hope all parliamentarians will support Bill C-404, intended to assist your incredible work to support those affected by this horrific practice of conversion therapy and bring awareness to the legacy effects that still exist today. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Calgary, Midnapore.
Cowgirls and cowboys, dust off your boots. The greatest outdoor show on earth is about to begin. From July 5th to July 14th, Calgary will welcome visitors from around the globe to celebrate our Western way of life. The Stampede Parade kicks off 10 action-packed days, including exciting chuck wagon races and rodeo, as well as live music and entertainment. We have world-class agricultural exhibits, weird and wonderful snacks, a huge midway, and an amazing display of evening fireworks as you two-step the night away at Cowboys or Ranchman's. This year, you can also visit the beautiful newly expanded BMO Centre, the largest event complex in Western Canada. And no Stampede experience would be complete without trying one of the many free pancake breakfasts or barbecues held across the city. Calgary's white hat hospitality extends to one and all, and no matter who you are or where you're from, I wish you all a very happy Stampede. Yeah!
The Honourable Member from Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the class of 2024 in Scarborough Agincourt and across Canada. Whether you are graduating from kindergarten, high school, college, or university, or any level in between, you can be proud of what you have accomplished. As you go forward, it's important to continue to be curious, helpful to others, and willing to explore new paths. You have gotten here with years of dedication, hard work, and perseverance. Life isn't always easy, so it's important to stop and recognize the effort you've put in to get here. I would also like to acknowledge your families, teachers, and school staff for their role in your monumental achievement. May your journey ahead be filled with continued growth and endless possibilities.
The Honourable Member from London North Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we know that changes in the digital environment have impacted news media. What is also true is that large media organizations have tended to unfortunately put profit ahead of people, including some of the most loyal employees. One of those is Jim Knight, who for 43 years worked at CTV London and its predecessors. I first met Jim when he was behind the camera and sometimes as a journalist when a media reporter was not available. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, this is someone who has served loyally, not just his community, but his country. We tend to forget that people behind the scenes are instrumental in helping news media happen, in helping those stories come together that tell the stories of everyday people. Jim was one of those. And so in the end, it's not just about Peter Mansbridge or Lisa Laflamme or Lloyd Robertson. It's about people who helped to shape the news. Jim Knight was one of those. We thank him for his service today and in all days. Jim, all the very best going future.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lilley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, the housing crisis is becoming unbearable for Quebecers. The shortage of affordable housing is being felt all across Quebec. Homelessness is a bigger and more visible problem than ever before. While Quebecers are suffering, the Bloc is voting with the Liberals against the Conservative leader's bill to build housing. just as they voted for $500 billion in centralizing inflationary budget appropriations. Calls for help are being heard everywhere in Quebec. Homelessness is rampant in Rouyn-Noranda, and community assistance agencies in Rimouski are barely managing their growing clientele. At a time when Quebec needs support more than ever, the Bloc refuses to listen to Quebecers' complaints. But here on this side of the House, we hear them loud and clear. Common sense Conservatives will continue to introduce measures to improve the quality of life of all Canadians, even if we're the only ones here doing that. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
L'honorable député, the honourable member from Ottawa South.
Mr. Speaker, the International Day of Parliamentarism is celebrated every year on June 30th. This year, June 30th also marks the 135th anniversary of the Interparliamentary Union, the IPU. Having begun as a small group of parliamentarians in 1889, today the IPU is a thriving international organization of 180 national parliaments open to 46,000 parliamentarians. While Canada first joined the IPU in 1912, the current Canadian group was established in 1960. As president of the Canadian group and of the IPU Standing Committee on UN Affairs, I have the privilege of experiencing firsthand the incredible work the IPU does to make the world a better place, especially in relation to peace, democracy, and human rights. On behalf of all 130 Canadian members of the Canadian Group, congratulations to the IPU on its 135th anniversary.
The honourable member from Lethbridge.
Well, after 9 years, it's just as we suspected. This Prime Minister is not worth the crime and certainly not worth the corruption. Recently, the Auditor General reported that more than 180 conflicts of interest were committed at the Prime Minister's Green Slush Fund. Corrupt directors actually funneled taxpayer money to the tune of $336 million. That's $336 million to companies that those directors own themselves. And so if that's not a textbook definition of corruption, I'm not sure what is. Conservatives have successfully pushed to try to bring action forward in order to make sure that this corruption is exposed, and now the RCMP are investigating it. They've also informed us that they have the ability to actually get that money back. It just takes a little bit of political will. Canadians certainly deserve that much at least. The Prime Minister must get that taxpayer money back, and he must act now. Only common sense Conservatives will continue to demand transparency from the Prime Minister and end this type of liberal corruption that exists right here in Ottawa. May Canadians be well served by the next government.
The honourable member from New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of raising taxes, this Liberal NDP government is doing it again with a new job-killing tax on health care, homes, farms, small businesses, and fishing communities. You heard me right. The taxaholics are again digging deeper into the pockets of Canadian taxpayers. The NDP Liberals are raising taxes on doctors during a doctor shortage, farmers while we have a food price crisis, home builders in a housing shortage, and small businesses during a cost of living crisis that this federal government created. To them, hard work pursuing the Canadian dream should be punished, not rewarded. A common sense Conservative government will fix this mess. We will introduce lower, fairer, and simpler taxes to restore the Canadian dream. We'll make sure hard work delivers strong paychecks that can buy affordable food, energy, in homes, in safe neighborhoods. Conservatives will bring it home.
The honourable member for Glengarry Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the work of an exceptional employee of the House of Commons broadcasting team who will be retiring in the next few days after more than 32 years. Lorraine Henderson began her career here in 1992. She quickly earned the trust of her colleagues by setting high broadcasting standards that met parliamentarians' expectations. Over the years, she's contributed to the success of many important events, including those linked to the visits of Joe Biden, Prime Minister Rutt, and Malala Yousafzai. A pioneer in non-traditional working environments, she's the first woman to to be appointed TV production director in Parliament. She has inspired many women to join the broadcasting team. Her professionalism and commitment over the years have been exemplary. Her legacy to the House of Commons will live on, for which we are most grateful. Happy retirement, and thank you for your contribution.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Griesbach.
Mr. Speaker, I want to humbly offer new thoughts on an aging tradition. Canada, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 157 years old. Happy birthday, kid. But like any good coming-of-age story, there is much internal conflict. We, Indigenous peoples and settlers alike, are at the convergence, or better said, at the place where rivers meet, perhaps again. All that which has kept us from each other has now led us to one another. Although our experiences of the last 157 years are vastly different, we can today see each other more clearly. We can hear each other more soundly, and we can understand each other more emotionally. Indigenous Peoples History Month and Canada Day are often a reminder for me of just how far we've truly come, even in my short time, Mr. Speaker. But it's also a painful reminder of just how much more work there is to be done. But justice begins with truth. It is where wisdom, redemption, and forgiveness lives. Reconciliation is not a policy, but a journey towards that truth we must all take. I want to thank all those who are offering truths about these lands, especially our youth and our elders. Kananaskam Tinawau. Let us continue to heed these truths, and in time, Mr. Speaker, we can become a worthy nation.
The honourable member for Abitibi-Temiskaming. This week, let's all celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day because the presence of First Nations and their influence on our society have been hidden for too long. Recognizing their contribution and the richness of their cultures and languages is essential. It's as much a question of truth as it is of reconciliation. Without their knowledge of medicinal plants in particular, but also without their support, the first Europeans in North America could never have survived, let alone prospered. Not to mention that, according to a growing number of historians, it was these first peoples who first laid the foundations of democracy in America. To celebrate their heritage, June 21st is truly the perfect date, since it's summer solstice, when day prevails over night. To all the Abenaki, Anishinaabe, Atikamekw, Cree, Huron-Wendat, Inuit, Innu, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Mohawk, and Naskapi, with whom we share our territory, happy birthday, Miigwech.
The honourable member from Prince George Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, the NDP Liberal carbon tax is costing Northerners billions. We found out the Radical minister's carbon tax will cost Canadians over $30.5 billion per year, and that's $2,000 per family by 2030. I was in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk last week, where the carbon tax has caused diesel to rise to $2.73 per litre. High fuel costs is the reason food is so expensive in the Arctic. A can of Heinz beans is $7. A loaf of bread is $8. A regular bag of peas is $10. A 4-liter jug of milk is $18. A local teacher from Inuvik told me by the end of the month, money is running short due to high food and heating costs. Judy, a local grandmother, told me many cannot afford healthy food, so they rely on high-calorie junk food like chips, chocolate, and pop to survive. In Tuktoyaktuk, Tina, a mother of 4, told me she struggles to afford even the basics like milk, sugar, coffee, and salt. So, will the radical environment minister finally resign?
Yeah. The honourable member from Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight a special event that took place last week on Parliament Hill, the 2nd annual Cutest Pets on the Hill Awards. Thank you to the Canadian Animal Health Institute for organizing this contest, and congratulations to all the nominees and winners. Of course, I would like to congratulate my Walnut, who won Cutest Dog. But I would like to recognize the runner-up, owned by none other than the deputy leader of the Conservative Party. She showed me a picture of her beautiful dog, Winston, and the look on her face can only be compared to the look she has during question period when she's looking at her leader. Mr. Speaker, there's lessons to be taken away from this. Walnut and Winston were competitors. It was friendly. They were friends before, they're friends after. It was not personal. The other lesson that can be taken away from this is it doesn't matter how you dress up your dog, how many polls you sniff along the way, the campaign matters.
Oral questions. Questions orales. L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. All right, explain this, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc Québécois leader voted in favour of a Liberal motion to increase taxes. Then, that same day, he tweeted that the tax also significantly impacts the savings, the lifelong savings of retirees. Now, he's against it. He wants to change things in committee, but the motion will not be sent to committee. The tax will be implemented in 1 week. Can the Prime Minister explain to his Liberal coalition colleague, Liberal Bloc coalition colleague, the Prime Minister explain to him how Parliament works? The Honourable President of the Treasury Board. Mr. Speaker, in the 2024 budget, we put forward a plan, an economic plan for our country. On the other side of the House, they don't have a plan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a plan for the economy, for families, for seniors, for children. Them, though, they do not have a plan, not at all in the slightest. I hope that everyone will vote in favour of our plan and do so this week. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Pardon, parti.
Yes, but it's a supposedly sovereignist party. The Bloc Québécois, they want to take money from Quebec's entrepreneurs, Quebec's farmers, Quebec's home builders, Quebec's doctors, and they want to take that money and hand it over to the Liberal government, the centralizing, massive Liberal government. How's that possible? How does that make sense? It's not common sense, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Conservative leader who loves to insult others, can he explain the common sense that someone who earns $500,000 in capital gains should pay less in taxes than a nurse who earns $50,000 a year? Can he explain his nonsense, his non-common sense? Why does he want middle-class families to pay more taxes than those who make huge profits through capital gains?
Mr. Speaker, we always knew this Prime Minister was not worth the cost after 9 years, but now his carbon tax cover-up has been exposed. We forced him to release data showing that in addition to the higher bills at the pumps and on home heating that Canadians directly pay in the tax, there's also going to be a $30 billion a year hit to our economy. That's $1,800 in lost wages and higher prices for Canadian families. Now that we've caught them hiding the true cost of their tax, how can we believe anything else they say about any other tax hike?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, facts are facts, and the facts are that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more money back from carbon pricing than they pay. Facts, Mr. Speaker, climate change is going to cost Canadians $35 billion by 2030. In fact, right now, Eastern Canada is seeing the second heat wave before the summer has even started. People are being evacuated in Northwest Territories. What's the Conservative response? Let the planet burn. It's immoral, Mr. Speaker. We won't have it on this side of the House. We will work with Canadians. We will help them. We will be there for them. Unfortunately, not the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the fanatical rhetoric of that extremist minister won't change anything. The reality is that nor will his carbon tax change the weather. His carbon tax is not going to eliminate a single forest fire, a single drought, a single heat wave. All it will do is turn up the heat on Canadian taxpayers. Now we know that their 8 and 10 talking point does not include a $25 billion hit to the economy, which works out to almost $2,000 in lost wages and higher prices for families. Again, if they've been hiding this, what else are they hiding about their other tax hikes?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noted last week my colleagues' newfound interest in what economists have to say. Well, 300 economists across this country actually validate the fact that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. What is appalling, Mr. Speaker, is the complete disregard and ignoring the effects of climate change and the costs of climate change. I don't know whether the honourable member is a climate denier or whether he just doesn't think climate change is very important, but his willingness to compromise the future of our children is absolutely appalling.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
And now that we've caught them covering up the real cost and who will pay their carbon tax, it raises the question about their job-killing tax on home builders, health care, small business, and farmers. The president of real estate company RE/MAX said it's not true that just the rich will pay. It will penalize average Canadians. The Canadian food professor says that farmers will pay, which means anyone who eats will pay. Right. So, Mr. Speaker, why won't they just clear all this up and accept an amendment to their capital gains tax hike to exclude anyone who's making less than $120,000 in income from paying a single cent in higher tax?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, actually a new report out today says that housing starts are up, Mr. 10%. Speaker, by 10%. We are now on track to build over 50,000 housing starts this year, compared to when the Leader of the Opposition was the housing minister. How many housing units were built, Mr. Speaker? Count them. That'd be 6, Mr. Speaker. I wonder about those stats, Mr. Speaker, and on this side of the House, we actually have a plan to build housing, and they continue to go up, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, we're back to square one in the ongoing saga of foreign interference. One leader says everything's hunky-dory, nothing to see here. Another leader says things are not going well at all, that the House is on fire. Both are asking us to have blind faith in their judgment, but their public statements prove that when the decisions were handed down, at least 2 people were not at home. None of this has helped, but now there's a risk that the HoC Commission will be called into question if the judge doesn't come to the same conclusions as one of our 2 chatty Cathys. Is it too much to ask to just let the Commission do its work?
The
Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for La Prairie for his question and for his hard work that we've done together. As I've said, we have given the HoC Commission the mandate and terms of reference to look into all issues related to foreign interference and our democratic institutions. We were encouraged by the fact that the HoC Commission is ready to look into the matters studied by NSICOP. We look forward to collaborating with the HoC Commission in this regard. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, obviously, we wouldn't be in this situation if the Prime Minister were trustworthy in this matter. He's been receiving intelligence briefings on interference for years. But he himself has admitted that he doesn't even read these briefings. The Prime Minister has had the infamous report on politicians under foreign interference in his hands since March, Mr. Speaker, but he still hasn't done anything. But, it had to come out in the papers for him to finally take an interest in the matter. It's truly disheartening. How can we expect the public to trust him to be responsible enough to fix his own caucus if necessary? Because he never actually does anything. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the member for La Prairie is normally an optimistic politician. Our government has taken this matter seriously right from the get-go. We take foreign interference very seriously and always have. The colleague knows that we will work with parliamentarians. In fact, just recently we worked together in this House to pass a very important bill to strengthen our security enforcement agencies and organizations. So that was a partisan question, but we as a government, we take our responsibilities seriously to strengthen our democratic institutions against the threat of foreign interference.
From Burnaby South.
It's been 9 long years since the Truth and Reconciliation Report was released. The Prime Minister claimed that the Indigenous communities were his most important relationship. Well, the commissioners today say progress is too slow. The Prime Minister's turned his back on Indigenous people. And every broken promise means Indigenous people have to wait even longer for clean drinking water, for adequate housing, for health care, for the services that they need, for justice. So when will the Prime Minister stop turning his back on Indigenous people?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, we've come a long way since 2015. In fact, we've seen an increase of 185% in spending on Indigenous priorities. Just today, I stood with the National Chief who talked about the improvement of the relationship between Canada and First Nations people. We made an announcement to support Ontario to deliver health care in the Winnebago health area for $1.2 billion, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to work on reconciliation with colleagues across the country. I want to thank all of the First Nations and Indigenous leaders who are working so hard.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
When New Democrats force them to.
Hear, hear.
It's been 9 years. 9 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission published its report. Today, the commissioners are unequivocal in stating that the Liberals' progress has been too slow. They are dragging their feet, and every day that passes is another day without housing, without drinking water, without justice. Can the Prime Minister admit that he would not be dragging his feet if it were CEOs urging him to take action?
Minister for Indigenous Services.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are working very, very hard with our Indigenous partners. Today,
with First Nations people every single day to do the kinds of things that the member opposite is talking about. Close infrastructure gaps, Mr. Speaker. Lift boil water advisories, Mr. Speaker. 96% of First Nations now live in communities with access to clean water, and we won't rest till it's done.
The Honourable Member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
Last week, only after relentless pressure from Conservatives, the Liberals finally ended their carbon tax cover-up. The numbers show the NDP Liberal carbon tax is going to blow a hole of $30 billion a year once they fully quadruple the carbon tax. That is nearly $2,000 per family per year. This radical environment minister knew that all along. Instead of publishing the report, he gagged and ridiculed the independent parliamentary budget officer. So the question is whether never-ending tax hikes finally stop, or better yet, will this minister just resign?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, 8 out of 10 Canadians do better where the federal system apply than not, Mr. Speaker. And the Conservative Party of Canada, after campaigning to put in place carbon pricing during the last election, now has turned their back on them just as much as they've turned their backs on Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Their only answer to climate change is to ignore it and to let the planet burn. This is immoral. We won't let this happen on this side of the House. We will be there to support Canadians, unlike the Conservative Party of Canada.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
And after 9 years, they don't have an environmental plan, they have a tax plan. And a tax plan they were trying to hide from Canadians, but it was Conservatives that finally got the answers that show the $30 billion a year hole it is blowing in our Canadian economy. $1 billion tax increase to farmers coming up. Quadrupling the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre on the price of gas. It is out of touch, it is arrogant, and it is punishing Canadians when they need help. Will this minister get with reality, finally stop increasing the carbon tax, and again, just better yet, fire himself?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, what we have is a comprehensive plan to address the threat of climate change, one of the most comprehensive in the world. We also have a plan for the economy, one that will ensure economic jobs, economic prosperity in a low-carbon world. What is astonishing, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that these folks have neither. They have neither an environmental plan to save the planet from burning. They have not an economic plan. And with the height of hypocrisy, that member over there actually campaigned on putting on a price on pollution. Where were they?
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Liberals knew that the carbon tax was costing Canadians billions of dollars. They knew and they covered it up.
The cost, $25 billion a year. That works out to $1,800 each and every year cost for every single Canadian family. You wonder why it's hard to pay for things? This is why. If the average Canadian went into work and lied and covered something up, they'd be fired. Will the Prime Minister fire this radical environment minister who tried to cover this all up from Canadians?
He's a failure. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, if anyone should resign in this House, it's the people who are misleading Canadians about the benefit of carbon pricing. 25 million tons of less pollution in this country because of carbon pricing. We have a plan to work with Canadians to help them better prepare to face the impacts of climate change. They have nothing. No plans for adaptation, no plan to reduce the amount of pollution, and no plan for the economy, Mr. Speaker. If anyone should resign, it should be them over there.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin County.
You want to talk about misleading Canadians? Pretending you have an environmental plan. Greenhouse gas emissions actually went up year over year. Canada is now ranked 62nd out of 67 for emissions performance reductions. We're now ranked with the low-performing countries. All the while, they're bankrupting Canadians while these limousine liberals drive around and preach, you should just take it. It's all a pack of lies, Mr. Speaker. This environment minister should be fired for covering up the truth of the cost of the carbon tax for Canadians. Will he resign?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I would invite the member to update his speaking notes, which date back to many months. We've just received, in fact, the Climate Scorecard 2024 Government Climate Leadership Award, Mr. Speaker. Canada. One of the best performance in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction since 2019 in all of the G7, Mr. Country, something that never happened under the Conservative government of Canada, that will never happen under a Conservative government of Canada.
Hear, hear. L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The radical environment minister must resign or be fired. End of story. First, he misled Canadians by falsely claiming that the carbon tax was good for Canadians from a financial standpoint. Then he hid a study from Canadians, a study conducted by his own department, which proved the opposite. When the budget officer found out, the minister gagged him by preventing him from releasing it and referencing it, and then he tried to ruin the PBO's reputation. The report is clear, though. The economic damage of the carbon tax will cost Canadian families almost $2,000 a year. When will the minister be fired for his economic extremism? The Honourable Environment and Climate Change Minister. Mr. Speaker, if someone should resign from this place, it's the member who just spoke, who last campaigned saying that he would price pollution, that he would fight pollution. Now he's turning his back on his own promises. On that side, they have no plan for Canadians, no plan for the environment, no plan to fight climate change. No plan at all. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Well, you know what he did, Mr. Speaker? He desperately tried to hide the fact that Quebecers are paying a very high price for the federal carbon tax, and they're doing so with the support of the Bloc Québécois. Despite his claims that Quebecers are not paying the carbon tax, his own figures, which the Conservatives forced them to reveal, tell a very different story. The report that he was so determined to hide shows that the economic cost of the carbon tax is $5 billion for Quebec. $5 billion for Quebecers. Seems to me that that's 5 billion reasons, good reasons, that the minister should resign. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Well, it's interesting to see the Conservative Party of Canada continue to demonstrate and prove their total ignorance when it comes to climate change. The member just now turned around. He should turn around and talk to the member behind him who was part of the Quebec provincial government when it implemented a pollution pricing system well before Ottawa did. And the member knows full well that our carbon tax does not apply in Quebec. It applies elsewhere in the country. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis-Matane-Matapédia. This week, the forecast is predicting perceived temperatures of 45 degrees this week. 45 degrees, not in Arizona, though, right here in the south of Quebec. The planet is getting hotter and the climate is changing. Meanwhile, the federal government still intends to offer $83 billion in tax gifts to big oil over the next 10 years. Not money for a just transition away from oil, but in fact money to cover up the impact of increased production. While Quebec burns, Ottawa is financially contributing for another 10 years of increased production of dirty oil. Isn't it time to put an end to it? The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. She understands how important it is to fight climate change. However, I disagree with the premise of her question. Canada is the only G20 country, Mr. Speaker, to have cut subsidies to fossil fuels, and we did so 2 years earlier than any of our G20 partners. We even went even further. We committed to cutting subsidies to Crown corporations and any corporations that contribute to fossil fuels, and we will complete that commitment by the end of this year, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Avignon, La Métis, Matane, Matapédia. It's 45 degrees in the south of Quebec, and Environment Canada is predicting an abnormally hot summer. According to the United Nations, 90% of the world's oceans have experienced unprecedented heat waves last summer, and the St. Lawrence River has not been spared. Quebec's climate change experts are predicting a warming of 7.6 degrees in the north, which is in fact 5 times more than the Paris Agreement target. Meanwhile, Ottawa is handing out $83 billion in tax gifts to big oil and another $34 billion to buy itself a pipeline. Wouldn't those billions be better spent on adapting to climate change?
Then I have
the Honourable Minister for Environment and Climate Change. Well, I'd like to thank my colleague for her question, and I'd like to state that last year, Canada passed a national climate change adaptation strategy for all provinces, territories, and Indigenous groups work together to help us develop that strategy so that together we can better prepare for adapting to climate change. And next week, we have a meeting of all FPT ministers responsible for environment to continue to strengthen national adaptation policy. The Honourable Member for Avignon, La Métis, Matapédia. Well, one report, according to an inventory report, we learned that dirty oil is in fact even dirtier than we thought. The federal government realized that it was miscalculating fugitive emissions from wells, flares, and pipes. What that means is that the 2021 emissions were retroactively increased by 38 megatons of GHGs. Well, that's good news if Ottawa is calculating more accurately, but it's bad news for the planet. Investing $117 billion in dirty oil, which is even dirtier than we thought, is that the lapsed environmentalist minister's plan to fight climate change? The Honourable Environment and Climate Change Minister. Well, I said it in English earlier, but for my colleague, I'll say it in French. Canada was just given the 2024 prize for the climate scorecard when it comes to our climate change performance. Between 2019 and now, we've been one of the highest performing countries in the G7 when it comes to reducing GHG emissions, Mr. Speaker. And yes, we do need to do more. I do agree with her on that. That's why through our plan, we are continuing to make progress. Within the next year, we will put forward a plan to cap oil and gas GHG emissions over time to ensure that that sector, like other sectors, does its fair share to bring down emissions.
Honourable Member from Lakeland.
Common sense Conservatives got proof that the Liberals kicked and screamed to hide, but most Canadians already know. After 9 years, the NDP Liberals' carbon tax is not worth the cost. It will gouge Canada's economy for about $30 billion. That's almost $2,000 for every household each year. In Lakeland, a family farm paid nearly $500 in carbon tax in 1 month. An agricultural group paid $5,000 in just 6 months, both before the April 1st hike. So will the Environment Minister finally just admit his failed carbon tax is a cash grab and resign?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would invite my honourable colleague to actually go and have a conversation with the 300 economists who have validated that 8 out of 10 families get more money back, that the price on pollution is a driver of innovation, is a driver of investment in our economy. Across the aisle, we have a Conservative Party in this country that denies the existence of climate change and has no economic plan to ensure the prosperity in the future for people from coast to coast to coast. It is truly a shame. They are abandoning the future of our children and the future of our country.
Absolutely. Shame. The honourable member from Lakeland.
Well, he should actually listen to what Canadians are pleading with him about, because emissions are up and so are the price of everything. It's all a sham. But the truth is, not once did the 1,200-page analysis show Canadians are better off with their carbon tax and rebate. The worst thing is the Prime Minister fought to hide those real costs of his agenda, even though he's never had to worry about affording anything in his entire life. He has the gall to tell Canadians that paying more for gas, heat, and groceries makes them better off, just like hiking taxes on small business and farmers, he claims makes Canadians better off. So none of it is true, and none of it's worth the cost or the cover-up. So if the fibbing Environment Minister won't resign, will the PM finally just fire him?
The honourable member is an experienced member, and that is getting very close to the line in terms of what is acceptable parliamentary behaviour. I will look at that question a little bit more carefully. The honourable member, the honourable minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable colleague and her colleagues across the aisle may be entitled to their own opinions, but they are not entitled to their own facts. The fact is that emissions are down in a significant way. The fact is that 300 economists, experts in their field, say that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back. Those are facts, Mr. Speaker. What's also a fact is that party across the way has no plan to address climate change, no plan for the economic future of the country. It is also the case that they all campaigned on putting in price on pollution. If anybody should resign, it's those members opposite.
The honourable member from Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fix is in. Last week, Conservatives forced the reveal of the secret report that the Prime Minister and his carbon tax-obsessed Environment Minister covered up, confirming that carbon tax costs families almost $2,000 per year, and every year $30 billion in lost economic productivity. Liberals are so desperate to hide the truth, they publicly smeared and gagged the independent budget officer. When will the Minister of Economic Environment Vandalism resign, or better yet, get fired?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that question, I believe, has been asked and answered several times already today. My question for the Conservatives is, why should a dollar earned from working, whether it be as an insurance broker, as a fish plant worker, as a construction worker, as a cashier, Mr. Speaker, why should a dollar earned from working be taxed higher than a dollar received as a profit from the sale of an investment? Why is it that a person flipping burgers pays a higher tax rate than a person flipping stocks, Mr. Speaker?
Order. The honourable member from Nunavut.
The more Inuit regain their pride, the more identity fraud we see. The problem is being made worse from inside the Prime Minister's caucus. The Parliamentary Secretary of Northern Affairs recently said her government would recognize the constitutional rights of Nunatuavut, despite the court ruling differently. Johannes Lam, President of Nunatuavut, has called for the demotion of the Parliamentary Secretary. Will the Prime Minister show his commitment to Inuit and protect legitimate communities from identity fraud?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for the very important question. Our government is fully engaged to making sure that all Section 35 rights are are developed and exercised with everybody who deserves Section 35 rights. We will continue engaging. We will continue talking to communities, will be they First Nation, Inuit, or Métis, and we will make sure that Section 35 rights are respected.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member from Courtenay, Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, in Union Bay on Vancouver Island, a massive ship full of toxic chemicals is being broken up in the high tide zone, in the same waters that half of BC shellfish come from. Recent tests show that this area has become a toxic wasteland, with copper levels 15 times higher than they should be. Local government, First Nations, and the province are calling for the federal government to act, but the Liberals are instead green-lighting the dumping of toxic waste on our coast. When will the Liberals finally put an end to this harmful shipbreaking and protect local health and the economy?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is very aware of the environmental impact and community impact that abandoned ships can have for Canadians. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to reducing the number of abandoned vessels, cooperating with port authorities and communities. DFO efforts have been ongoing since 2017. Over 580 dangerous ships have been dealt with. Following guidelines, we all have a role to play to ensure the safety of our maritime ways, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians from across the country are concerned about the rising levels of auto theft. This is an issue that our government takes very seriously, and we have taken meaningful action to combat it. Yesterday, our government announced the deployment of a mobile X-ray scanner in the GTA to combat auto theft. This scanner will enable the CBSA to recover even more stolen vehicles and help our law enforcement partners to crack down on crime. Can the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs tell Canadians about the action our government is taking in the GTA to combat auto theft?
Excellent. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank our colleague from Humber River, Black Creek. Yesterday's announcement adds to multiple measures our government has taken to counter auto theft and crack down on organized crime. The deployment of an X-ray scanner is an important step in combating auto theft and organized crime, not only in the GTA, but right across the country. The scanner will allow law enforcement to intercept stolen vehicles before they go to ports to leave Canada. While Conservatives were in power, they cut the CBSA, and their capacity to counter organized crime will continue to crack down on organized criminals.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. July 1st, moving day in Quebec is fast approaching, and we are facing a disaster due to the housing crisis. The government, supported by the Bloc, has created this situation with its exorbitant inflationary spending. We are now seeing homelessness in places like Trois-Rivières, Rimouski, Rouyn-Noranda, and Sept-Îles. All these cities are in Bloc ridings. Will the Prime Minister and the Bloc commit to stop wasting taxpayers' money to alleviate the housing crisis? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been some time since we've reminded my colleague, the member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles, that 6 affordable housing units were built by his Conservative leader over the course of his whole career as Minister of Housing throughout the country. In just his writing, 222 have been built, and in the coming days, we will be announcing more in the very heart of his writing. Would he like to invite me to tour those many housing units, many more than were built by his Conservative leader? The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc voted for $500 billion in budgetary appropriations, contributing to the current housing crisis, and the Bloc voted with the Liberals against our leader's bill to make housing more affordable. And now, newspaper articles are telling us that homelessness is skyrocketing precisely in Bloc ridings. Quebecers are suffering and have lost confidence in this government and their Bloc friends. Will the government do the right thing and call an election now? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we can do right now is go visit some of the 222 affordable housing units that were built in the past months in his riding, the hundreds and thousands that will be built in the coming years with the support of the government of Quebec. That doesn't compare very favorably to the 6 affordable housing units built by the Conservative leader, the insulter-in-chief, because he calls Quebec's municipalities incompetent. He only built 6 during his whole career as Minister of Housing. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this Liberal government, Quebecers are living in housing hell. The lack of affordable housing throughout Quebec is forcing many women to stay in violent relationships. Not only did the Bloc make the housing crisis worse by voting for $500 billion in budgetary appropriations, it also voted with the Liberals against the Conservative leader's bill to accelerate the construction of affordable housing. Can the Bloc and this Prime Minister stop imposing misery on Quebecers by voting against measures designed to improve their well-being? The Honourable Minister of Procurement and Public Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't want to compare the record of the members for Quebec. In this member's riding, there were 250. It's a lot more than the 6 affordable housing units, 6, Mr. Speaker, built by the member of Carleton, the Conservative leader, insulter-in-chief, because he was so incompetent. That's what he built throughout his career all over the country. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, with 2 weeks to go before moving day, Quebecers are worried. Many of them have to look for new housing. In Saguenay, some families think they'll end up on the street because of soaring rent costs. Despite this, the Bloc and the Liberals voted against our common sense bill to make housing more affordable. The Bloc even supported the government and voted for the $500 billion in budgetary appropriations that contributed to the housing crisis. It will cost you to vote Bloc, especially in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. When will the Liberals, supported by the Bloc, finally listen to us? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Bad news, Mr. Speaker, for the member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. 181 affordable housing units were built in his riding, but the good news is that 181 is 30 times more than the 6 affordable housing units built by the Conservative leader during his whole career as Minister of Housing throughout the country. 6 affordable housing units, Mr. Speaker. I know it's hard to believe, but that's the number. Fortunately, in his riding, there have been 181 over the past few months, and there will be more in the coming months.
Order. À l'ordre.
Order. The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Quebecers are rallying against the $145 million cut to our labour force training. The Government of Quebec and labour market partners have asked Ottawa to reconsider in a letter signed by the FTQ, CSN, CSQ, Conseil du Patronat, Chambers of Commerce, manufacturers, and exporters. All speak with one voice. The Minister of Labour was due to meet his counterpart today. Will he announce that he is cancelling the cuts? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Yes, thank you. I thank my colleague for her question. Listen, it's extremely important that our government invest in training. We are making historic investments in training, and we will continue to work with businesses throughout Quebec. That's what we're doing, and we are collaborating very well with my colleague, the Minister of Labour, who is investing record amounts in training, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. The Liberals have a pattern. They give without counting the cost when it comes to oil companies or untendered contracts to the McKinseys of this world. But they count their pennies when it comes to helping employ the unemployed, young people, people living with disabilities, and more. Their $145 million cut represents 16% of federal labor transfers to Quebec. It doesn't make sense. The government must reverse course. Will it do so?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is making record investment to create record jobs, $50 billion in the auto sector alone, creating tens of thousands of jobs. We are also investing record amounts in skills training, billions of dollars each and every year, labor market transfers to the provinces, sectoral workforce programs, doubling of the UTIP union training, $1 billion supporting annually for apprentices. No government has delivered more for training and jobs than this Liberal government. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Niagara Falls.
Speaker, Niagara Falls is powered by tourism, and I'm already hearing concerns from small business operators over this Liberal NTB government's new capital gains tax. Simply put, after 9 years, these Liberals don't care about small business. Remember, it was this government that called them tax cheats. Now these small businesses are falsely being targeted by this NDP Liberal coalition as the top 1%ers who need to pay more. Speaker, how many family-run businesses are going to be unfairly taxed and face ruin because of this government's policy?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would invite my colleague opposite to look into the important small business tax exemption that is also coming into effect. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to know why the Conservatives would rather slash the pensions of our seniors than ask the wealthy to pay just a little bit more. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the Conservatives why they would rather cut school lunches for over 400,000 children than to ask the 1% in our society to pay just a little bit more, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Niagara Falls.
Speaker, the member should be speaking to Nick and his family, who recently sold their tourism retail business after 40 years in operation. The price they negotiated this past winter did not account for this surprise, massive, and unfair Liberal tax hike they will now be facing. In fact, Nick writes, the sale was for the retirement of 4 families, and the extra loss of income that we did not anticipate is utterly unfair. Why is the Minister of Finance targeting small family-run businesses and ruining their retirement dreams?
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Conservatives who continue to mock the supports we provide small businesses or vote against all the supports we've provided with small businesses, we on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to support small businesses. And in fact, on this side of the House, we reduced small business taxes from 10.5% to 9%. We will continue to support small businesses and be there for them to start, grow, and scale their businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Battleford, Lloydminster.
Speaker, millions of Canadians are without a family doctor, and the shortage is even more severe in rural and remote communities. The carbon tax already punishes them for driving long distances when they have no other choice. And now the Prime Minister's job-killing tax on healthcare will make it even harder to find a doctor. Mr. Speaker, it's not fair that Canadian families have to go without a doctor. So my question is, how many more Canadians will lose a family doctor just to pay for this Prime Minister's out-of-control spending?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, and of course asking for a more fair and equitable tax system where those that are the very wealthiest pay a little bit more in tax so that we can have monies for doctors and nurses and to make investments into our healthcare system is actually the answer, not the problem. The problem is Conservative cuts. The fact that they want to attack our healthcare system with deep cuts that would create much worse problems. Of course, the world has faced big challenges in healthcare coming out of COVID, and what we've seen in Canada is leadership. 26 agreement, $200 billion, dental care, pharmacare, and action across the board, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Laurent.
Speaker, this time 2 years ago, Roe v. Wade was overturned in the United States. The fear and uncertainty this has caused millions of women cannot be minimized. It is a reminder that here in Canada, choice for women is paramount. While Conservative MPs celebrated the overturning of Roe v. Wade, our government stood committed to ensuring choice for women remained a fundamental right. Could the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth share the importance of this work?
The Honourable Minister for Women and Gender Equality.
Thanks to the member for her fierce advocacy. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, Roe v. Wade was overturned in the U.S., and so many thought that was an impossibility. But that taught us that vigilance everywhere is imperative. This past weekend, I met Liz, a self-described old feminist in Thunder Bay, and Liz wanted me to remind Canadians that the right to an abortion is a human right and always worth fighting for. That's exactly what we will continue to do on this side of the House. That side of the House cannot say the same, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Brantford-Brant.
This government's capital gains tax is killing jobs in healthcare, home building, small businesses, and farming. An agricultural producer in my riding is deeply concerned that this tax is undermining the profitability and sustainability in an already volatile business environment. Their current transition of ownership is severely impacted by these tax changes, rising input costs, and softening markets. The minister is raising taxes without even passing a law, which begs the ultimate question: how many more surprise tax hikes will this government spring on Canadians?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would just like to make very clear one important point, and that is the changes that we have introduced in the budget are not going to affect the paychecks of Canadians. They just are not. If you take home a salary, Mr. Speaker, anybody taking home a salary in Canada is not going to see a change based on what we have presented for the capital gains, Mr. Speaker. In fact, what we are asking is those who don't make a salary, who have their money working for them, Mr. Speaker, who make incredible profits on the investments that they sell, they will be paying a little bit more.
The Honourable Member from Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Anti-Semitism has become a plague on university campuses. Hamas sympathizers camping out at McGill are promoting the Revolutionary Summer program, featuring images of keffiyeh-clad fighters brandishing machine guns. It's appalling, Mr. Speaker. Summer camps used to be about campfires and canoeing. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, it's become bring your machine gun to camp to threaten and harass Jewish students. It must be stopped. Now, what are they going to do about it?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity and Inclusion.
Mr. Speaker, I think every single Canadian and every single member in this House condemns anti-Semitism. Mr. Speaker, we know that combating anti-Semitism and hate takes concrete action. That is why in this particular budget, Mr. Speaker, we're investing $273 million towards Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate. We've also invested more than $200 million towards Canada's anti-racism strategy. We've launched the Community Resiliency Fund. We're working with the Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to do everything possible to make sure we combat hate in this country and around the world. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Selkirk, Interlake Eastman.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs told CBC News last week that it was news to her that Russian warships are docked alongside one of our Canadian naval vessels in Havana, celebrating the Cuban communist dictatorship. This morning, the Minister of National Defense was asked if he had told the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course, he denied it. It is both reckless and dangerous for the Liberals to honor Cuba, Russia's junior partner, and once again are undermining our relationship and support for Ukraine. So why is the Minister of National Defense using our Navy to cozy up to the communist regime in Cuba with our Russian adversaries?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to act surprised that the Conservatives are politicizing the Royal Canadian Navy deployments, but frankly, I'm not. To be very clear, Mr. Speaker, this was a military mission. Along with our American allies, the Canadian Navy and Air Force have been tracking the movements and activity of a Russian naval flotilla along the eastern seaboard and into Cuba with our Aurora aircraft and the HMSC Ville de Quebec. Upon the advice and at the request of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Joint Operations Command, I authorized the HMS Margaret Brooke to visit Havana. We were well aware that the Russians would be present at the same time, and we planned our mission accordingly.
The honourable member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that auto theft is a growing problem and that organized crime is always reinventing itself to thwart the tactics of our police forces. Yesterday, our government announced the deployment of a mobile X-ray scanner that can scan cargo containers for stolen vehicles. Can the Minister of Public Safety inform this House of the actions taken by our government to intercept more stolen vehicles and disrupt the organized crime groups behind auto theft? Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, I thank our colleague for Vaughan Woodbridge for his work on this issue, of course for his French as well. The deployment of an X-ray scanner to find stolen vehicles within cargo containers is an important tool for the Canada Border Services Agency in fighting organized crime across the country. When the Conservatives were in power, they cut funding to the agency, cut funding for law enforcement to fight organized crime, and cut services to Canadians. We are doing the opposite. We will protect Canadians.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Strathcona.
It's been 3 years since Kabul fell, and for Afghans, life gets worse every day. Canadians want to help Afghans living under the horrific Taliban rule, but this government is getting in the way. The flawed bill that they passed a year ago, C-41, hasn't been implemented. There's been no guidance and no funding for any Canadian organization. Nothing. As Afghan girls face gender apartheid, as people starve, the incompetence of the Liberals is staggering. Why is the government delaying the much-needed aid to save lives?
The Honourable Minister for International Development.
Mr. Speaker, in June of last year, Bill C-41, which created a humanitarian exception as an authorization regime, was passed. This new legislation facilitates Canada's engagement to address humanitarian crisis and advance human rights globally, while also ensuring strong counterterrorism financing provisions. There is no doubt that any delays on such an important matter are frustrating for all of us. We're hopeful that this will launch in the near future.
The honourable member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister once said that he thought HoC was well suited to examine foreign interference in Canada's democracy and democratic institutions. But apparently, not anymore. Why the change? Was it an HoC report that shed some redacted light on the willing involvement of Liberals guilty of seeking political and financial benefit? Does the Prime Minister still feel that, quote, Canadians need to have faith in their institutions and deserve answers and transparency, end quote? Or has his party's Beijing masters called for a reversal?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our colleague should be careful before he simply makes up stuff in question period and asserts things that he knows are absolutely false. He knows very well, Mr. Speaker, that our government created for the first time ever a committee of parliamentarians to oversee the work of our security agencies. We think it's important for parliamentarians from every political party and the other place to do this important work. We've acted on their recommendations. We thank them for this important contribution to the fight against foreign interference and to a series of other measures important for assuring the national security of all Canadians.
So brings us to the end of question period. I wish to draw the attention of members to the presence in the gallery of the Honourable Ryan Strawn, Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. And while we are on our feet, I'd like to also also introduce the Honourable Lennox Andrews, Minister for Economic Development, Planning, Agriculture and Lands, Forestry, Marine Resources and Cooperatives of Grenada. Also like to recognize the presence in the gallery of the Honourable Penelope Beckles-Robinson, Minister of Planning and Development of Trinidad and Tobago. I see that the Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona is rising on her feet. On a point of order.
There have been discussions, and I think if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion.
Okay. I regret to inform the honourable member that there have been several cries of no, to which there is not unanimous consent. And I will say once again, as I say all the time, to make sure that we use the time efficiently of members, if it's possible to get agreement before a member rises seeking unanimous consent. It being 3:14, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded divisions on the motion at report stage of Bill C-40. Call in the members.